Hey everyone, it's a great pleasure to have Abby Rutledge from Nova Appraisers here with us this afternoon to answer some questions and to help buyers and sellers who are considering either buying or selling a house just become educated as to what goes into an appraisal process. Buyers sell and they buy, so there are always buyers out there, whether they're sellers at any given stage. So we thought this would be good information for everyone. Abby has 27 years experience here in the Northern Virginia area. And so let's begin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just ask you just very quickly then, to start off, what does an appraiser actually do?
Very specifically, an appraiser develops an opinion of value for real property. That's what an appraiser does.
Okay.
So we're developing an opinion.
An opinion about a particular property?
Yes.
Okay. And who does the appraiser actually work for, and why is this important?
So in a purchase scenario, the appraiser works for the lender. This is important because the lender requires a neutral third party not be biased when determining the market value.
Okay.
So it's important.
So even though the buyer is the one who actually pays for the appraisal,
the lender it's really the lender's appraisal to use towards the collateral for that property.
So in this case, the buyer is the one who's paying, but the buyer is the customer, but indirectly the appraiser is actually reporting back to the bank.
Yes.
So that's an interesting and important distinction.
It
to
is.
Make there. What types of homes and areas do you particularly specialize in?
So I typically appraise in Northern Virginia, all of Northern Virginia. I really focus on the conventional market, and as a certified appraiser, I can appraise properties over $1 million. So I am on a lot of high dollar properties, but I do it all: condos, townhouses. Yeah.
But when you said conventional, you're talking about conventional loans?
Conventional loans, typically.
So you're not doing appraisals for VA loans, FHA,
I
USDA?
used to, yes. And actually USDA, I do do USDA. They don't have a lot of requirements. I used to appraise for FHA, but I made a business decision a while ago, several years ago, to not do it when they started adding a little more liability to the appraiser. But that's just a business decision. It doesn't mean it's a bad product. It's just my personal.
And most buyers will take out a conventional loan if they possibly can, because it ends up being cheaper for them in the
Right.
Okay. What factors do you take into consideration when estimating the value of a home?
So this is important because there are 20 elements of comparison on the sales comparison approach. And the sales comparison approach is the primary approach that the lender wants to see when you are valuing a property, because we are comparing the subject property to comparables. Mm-hmm. So some of the 20 elements of comparison that we're looking at are location, view, site size, quality of construction, age, condition, bedroom, bath counts, finished rooms below grade, heating and cooling, fireplaces. So the list goes on. So it's a comprehensive, really detailed grid that we are having to compare. So and the lender requires each element to be bracketed if possible. So that's basically falling within or between certain defined limits. Mm-hmm. So the elements of comparison basically give a complete view of the subject property being appraised. So we know out there typically people look for design and then they look at square footage. And then they might look at bedroom bath count, but we look at all of that, but we have many other elements of comparison that we actually have to look at as well.
Do you include short sales and foreclosures in your comps?
So I just included a short sale last week as a comparable, but it was a market value comparable. Okay. So as long as they are at market, and a lot of times these lenders, they're not giving properties away anymore. They've gotten a lot smarter. So if it's a good condition foreclosure, if it's a good condition short sale, you might see an appraiser use them, but only if it actually is current market value. You would use them possibly back in the past when they were prevalent, because Obviously, if your short sale market, if every home's a short sale, that's your market.
Yes.
But we're not really seeing that right now.
Okay, but you do if the price is if the property is priced at market value, that doesn't make any difference that it should be a short sale.
No, I'm not seeing that difference.
What about interior features? Do you, for example, do you differentiate when you walk the house between, say, hardwood floors and carpet? You know, whether there's granite or corian. Do you get to that level of specificity? You know, the brand of the appliance, the age of the roof, HVAC, water systems, whether it's new windows, the age of the roof. Do you take all of that into consideration?
Because there's a lot to answer under that one question, I'm going to read my notes just to make sure I cover everything.
Absolutely.
So basically, the interior features fall under two categories: your quality of construction and your condition. So those are the two things that we're looking at. I would need to look at the subject as a whole and find the comparables most similar in quality of construction and condition. So if a home did have hardwood floors, I would want to try to find another home that had hardwood floors to see if there's a value add for that feature in the market. Granite and corian are both solid surface countertops, and so we don't really see a difference there. It's when it's a laminate countertop,
okay,
then you probably would see the value could be reduced.
Okay.
Brand of appliances can make a difference in a higher end home, but not normally in your typical dwelling. And that's just because what does the typical buyer in that market look for? Are they looking, okay, G profile is fine for me. I'm probably not going to pay another $5,000 because it has a sub-zero if the house is $500,000 house, right? So it all depends on the market, what the type of home you're appraising to really determine if there's a value add. When looking at the roof, HVAC, water heater, etc. items, sometimes there's no additional added value as these are considered maintenance items. If a home is 30 plus years old, a typical buyer would expect some, if not all, of these items to have been replaced, especially if a seller is asking for full market pricing. Okay. It's when these items haven't been done that you tend to see a lower price.
Okay, so there are expectations.
There are.
Based on the price. And so the fact that there might be a brand new roof if the house is only 15 years old, but there's a brand new roof because it wasn't put on there very well, you wouldn't necessarily give that any extra value, even though it, ordinarily it would still have another 50. The original roof should have another 15 years, but it's now brand new and it will last at least 30 years. That there's no difference.
It's under the umbrella of quality of construction. Basically, okay, it has something that's new, and when you're talking about a 15-year-old house, though, that gets a little bit. That tends to. I'd have to look into that a little bit more. Okay. Again, what is the typical buyer going to pay knowing it's 15 years old versus, a brand new. So.
Okay, that's good. New windows, for example, does that?
So there is an area on the appraisal, one of the elements of comparison are energy efficient items, and that is where I actually mention replaced windows. Now, when you are talking about a 30, 40-year-old home, most of the comparables say replaced windows. So you're just showing this is the market, this is typical. Okay. If not, then yes, I do try to see if there's a value add for replaced windows.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. Now, we know that above grade finished square feet is very important, but do appraisers actually count square feet for storage space, closets, bathrooms, for example?
Yes, storage spaces and closets, that's all included in the total square footage. So they're not extracted in any way. When we are appraising and we're measuring a footprint. We're not measuring individual rooms. So that footprint has all of that area included. So yes.
But what about... Yes.
Oh.
We have a question.
Okay.
Yes. They're asking, if the owner spent money on the interior doors, does that matter?
That falls under the quality of construction. So that kind of gets down to the minutia where you start trying to figure out, let's say it's an older home and it had hollow doors. Then they've upgraded to, say, your 6-panel. I think it's going to enhance your marketability, but I don't know how much it would really translate to an actual appraisal.
Okay.
But it would be included under the quality of construction and mentioned.
Let's go back to the question regarding square footage. Thank you. It is actually the footprint, the outside, basically, that's taken into consideration. How much value do you, but then let's look at the basement, the below grade.
Okay.
How do you value, a finished basement versus an unfinished basement?
So, there's no one-size-fits-all value for a finished versus an unfinished basement. I basically would look to see how much basement is finished, what rooms are finished, and then make adjustments based on what the market says that finished space is worth at the time of inspection. The same with an unfinished basement. If I have a colonial and it has an unfinished basement, I would need to find another similar home with an unfinished basement to really determine what value the finished basement gives versus the unfinished. And the reason I say it's not a one size fits all, because you might have a townhouse that has an unfinished basement, or you might have a detached $750,000 colonial that has an unfinished basement. They're not going to be the same.
No.
And it is going to depend on the market at the time.
Right. Okay. So comparables are all important.
Right.
Okay. Do you give any monetary value to things like natural light, green building methods?
So natural light would fall under the umbrella of it enhances the marketability. It's the same with the condo. Let's say you're on the 3rd floor and you have an open floor plan. That's not additional square footage. It's just air.
Yes.
So you don't value air, you don't value light, because it's too hard to extract. You might have a buyer that decides that they don't want windows and they keep their blinds closed all day. So again, it would, to me, I think it would be something that would enhance the marketability possibly if somebody likes all the light, but there's no way to really value that.
Okay. How about appliances that have the Energy Star, for example?
So,
that are greener, or maybe some building methods that have been used that are greener. Does that?
So I've actually appraised some green homes. Mm-hmm. In 27 years, I would say maybe 3 in this market. So there's not enough data. There's not enough, we're just not, Northern Virginia, we're just not there yet. Yeah. So I think we need more green homes. I think we need to have more data to really extract what the value add. Again, you can put it under the quality of construction, the condition, okay, this is what's going on. Energy Star appliances, again, it's one of those things where we'd have to look at, okay, here's a property that has Energy Star appliances, here's a property that doesn't. Was there really a difference? And it's up to the buyer to determine that.
Yes. So some of these things are just really difficult to define.
They are, yes.
Do you give a different value to an upscale renovated kitchen versus a mid-range kitchen? And the same thing with bathrooms.
This is one of those, it all depends answers.
Yes.
So you want to make sure a property isn't over-improved for the market. So the answer would likely be, what would the typical buyer in that neighborhood expect? If you go, okay, case in point, do a community, every single house has granite countertops, hardwoods in the kitchen, stainless steel appliances. That's what the builder put in there. This is an upscale neighborhood, you have this. Another house, they decide they want to change their appliances. So they go to Viking, or they go to Sub-Zero, or GE Monogram. Is that it's not typical for that neighborhood. And there is an expectation that you're going to have granite and you're going to have nice appliances anyway. So as a buyer, you're going to pay more. And again, it comes down to that specific date and time and the appraiser having to see if it's adding value.
Absolutely. Okay. What about swimming pools? Do you find around here they actually add value or take away value?
So in our market, it's not expected And the market should tell you what, if any, value an in-ground pool contributes. I typically don't see it reduce the value as much as reducing the buyer pool. Meaning, people aren't going to want them. They either want them or they don't want them.
Okay.
But I will say that the rate of return on an in-ground pool is very low.
Okay.
And above ground pools are personal property. So you might have, and again, it also depends on your market. Are you in a higher end market over $1 million? They spent $250,000 for their pool. At that point, the pool might become a little more valuable, but you're still never going to get what you pay for a pool in this market.
So it's very much in the eyes of the buyer.
It really is.
In a neighborhood like this.
And it is one of the elements of comparison that a lender would want bracketed. If you have a subject property that has an in-ground pool, they want to see another property that has an in-ground pool because they want to see, is there really value there or not value there.
Got it. Okay. What about where the house is situated on? If it's on a corner lot, if it's on a busy street, if it backs to a commercial building, if it's in a flood zone,
Okay.
if it's beside a school. Do you take these factors into consideration?
Absolutely. They're very
So the flood
important.
zone. The flood zone will be...
Well, the flood zone, no. So the flood zone, on every appraisal, we run a flood zone report, and it tells us what zone it's in, whether it's in a flood zone, whether it's not a flood zone. It's then transmitted to the lender. They decide what they want to do at that point. We make no adjustments for being in a flood zone. We're just reporting. Mm-hmm. So flood zones, that is what the lender decides what they want to do then.
What about some of the others?
Yes, definitely. So corner lot, very interestingly enough, used to be a box you could check on the appraisal form. In 2005, they removed it because I think they just realized you can't figure out, is it a value add, is it does it take away? So we don't even address corner lots. No, but busy roads, railroad tracks, power lines, commercial industrial buildings, golf courses, waterfront, water view, woods, parkland, to name a few, would fall under the location and view elements of comparison. So we have two. We have a location and we have a view.
Yes.
As an appraiser, I have to determine if the location of a property is beneficial, neutral, or adverse. The same goes for the view. If beneficial or adverse, the appraiser has to determine if a positive or negative adjustment is required. So absolutely, it is addressed. You have to put the view on the appraisal, you have to put the location, and we have to try to determine if there is a negative or positive locational factor.
Okay. So a golf course, for example, would be considered to be beneficial, or not necessarily, depending on if you're in the parking lot.
Well,
you're facing the parking lot versus the green.
Right, you would want to be backing to the green.
Yes.
You definitely would want that. But it's interesting because it comes back to what's going on in the market. If we're in an increasing market, it's amazing how views and locations, those two areas seem to kind of diminish. Meaning, in a busy market, if I have a house that's backing to a busy road, there may be absolutely no adjustments I make for backing to that busy road because we're in an increasing market and people just want a house and they're not really taking that into consideration. Now, in a decreasing market, then you start seeing your views and locations being a little more, or let's just say if there's an oversupply, then you're going to start saying, we really want to back to woods, and there's 10 other houses out there that back to woods, so we don't want to back to a busy road.
Gotcha.
So it is market driven, what's going on.
All right. Do you look for code violations when you're inspecting the inside of a house? Do you go looking around?
So I'm not required to look for code violations. So I'm not.
Is that because it's conventional as opposed to another type of appraisal?
I think I'm not so sure. I know even when I did FHA, I was not looking for code violations. We would report. You would report, and then basically the lender could decide at that point.
So you would report them?
Yes, if I felt, if it was obvious. But I don't work for the permit office. I'm not not trained. It's just, if something's,
you put it down.
and the same with the conventional. Basically, on a conventional loan, the items a lender would want you to flag is anything related to the saleability, safety, and a security item.
Okay.
So let's just say I walk out on a deck and there's boards missing, or it's rotted and it's obvious, like that's a safety hazard.
Right.
You would call for that even on a conventional.
Right.
Or let's just say you have a sliding glass door.
Yes.
that isn't secured to the outside, and it's 3 foot above the ground, and somebody could walk out and fall out. That you would have to call for, and even on a conventional.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about a lot of... Do you have another question?
Yeah,
Yes.
Another question from Kathy.
Okay.
Do you like it when an agent meets you at the property?
Absolutely. I have. That's just me, though. I want to meet you. Anything you want to give the appraiser, if you want to give me the plat, the survey, floor plan, even the comparables, I don't have to use them, but you're the one that listed that property. You're the one that has been attached to that property for probably a couple months at times, and I would want to know what information you have, and it just goes into my file. And so yes, that's a great question.
Yeah, because there was a time there when we seemed to be pushed apart.
We were told.
We were told that we weren't to interact.
Exactly, and
Or influence in any way.
And I think that the problem is that word influence. I think it got confused. It's not like you were going and telling the appraiser, you have to use this and you have to appraise this, but giving us information, I don't consider that influence.
What do you, let's say for example a seller came to you and was interested in the kinds of upgrades that would actually hold true and hold the value if they were considering selling within a year or two. They wanted your advice as an appraiser.
I think I would give the same advice as a real estate agent would kitchen and bathrooms. Those are the two primary. And what I've noticed, you don't even have to do a full remodel. What I have noticed, and especially with the flipped properties, is if there is granite or some solid surface in the kitchen and there's stainless steel appliances, a lot of buyers walk in and automatically think the kitchen's been remodeled. The same holds true for the bathroom. If you change the vanities and you might change the flooring, there's this, oh, okay, it's been remodeled. It's really just an update, but the perception is. So yes, I would go back to just kitchens and bathrooms.
So that's really interesting for any sellers who might be watching, who are interested in doing some work with the idea of eventually selling, is that they could spend some money on kitchens and bathrooms, but also they don't have to go completely crazy. You can just do certain pieces, replace certain pieces, and it can give the impression of being updated. That's really interesting.
Yes.
How buyers will have that perception.
Oh yes, and I've definitely seen it translate to the market for sure.
That's great. Where do you pull your data from?
So we typically pull our data from the local MLS, MRIS system, and also the local tax records. Those are the two primary that we use.
Areas.
Yes.
Okay. And what would you say is the toughest part of your job?
Oh, there was no question about this. The expectation to hit a value for a purchase transaction. That's the hardest part.
Okay. So you go basically forearmed with a number in mind because you're privy to the actual offer itself?
We do. And in fact, it's so important that we see that the URAR form was changed to include, did the appraiser analyze or not analyze a copy of the contract? And if we say we did not analyze and we send the report in, it goes nowhere. It stops. That's how important the GSEs, believed that when they redid the form back in 2015 I think it was, that they went ahead and, the UAD, when they redid the UAD, I'm sorry, I gotta look at that date. Anyway, that was how important it was for us to analyze a copy of the contract. So yes, we do know the sales price, we do know what someone is willing to pay for the property.
Right, and so the toughest job is really being able to substantiate that?
Yes.
Because you find that most of the time you're having to really work hard at that. It's not necessarily, yes, this is very much.
It depends on the market. Right now, it's extremely difficult. This is the hardest time of year for an appraiser to appraise because we're hitting in that increasing spring market. There's low inventory right now. We're using winter sales as comparables, so this is really a challenge. We're finding 10 offers on the same property, escalations, 20, 30,000 over, multiple contracts. Appraisals are taking twice as long right now.
That's interesting, because we ran into a situation not very long ago when we had some sellers who were very keen to get on the market as quickly as possible. And so they were poised to go end of February, beginning of March. And that's typically great when somebody's ready to go. But what we found was that there weren't really any viable comps.
Mm-hmm.
All the comps in their particular subdivision had been from the previous fall.
Yes.
And so we struggled with that because the offers, we knew there'd been an uptick. We knew that there had been an increase in value from last fall to the spring in the surrounding areas, but we didn't have a comp within the subdivision. And so it was actually very painful, and it wasn't until sometime later when a couple of other homes had sold that agents were able to see, and buyers by extension were able to see, that the houses were actually worth a little bit more. So I think what I'm hearing from you is what we had experienced.
Yes.
You don't want to be the first on the market if there hasn't really been much activity at the very beginning of the season, because everybody's going to be relating to the previous year's comp.
Right.
And that can pull everything down. So,
You are correct. I mean, granted, we're going to look at actives and under contracts as well.
yes.
But when there's low inventory, you really don't have a lot of under contracts and actives either. So yes, the beginning of the spring market is extremely painful.
Yes. What should buyers and sellers know about the appraisal process?
So the buyers and sellers should know that the appraiser is hired by the lender to make sure the property is worth the price the buyer and the seller have agreed upon. That's so important.
It seems obvious, but it's worth stressing because it's not necessarily as easy as that, because then the bank is coming in.
Yes.
That's why the appraisal is involved. And of course the bank has another agenda. The bank wants to make sure that the money it's lending on that property, the property is worth the money it's lending.
Yes.
And the buyer and seller may have other ideas, but in reality when there is a loan, a mortgage involved, one has to be brought down. It's not as though it's a cash deal.
Perfect analogy. If it was a cash deal, they could pay whatever they want.
Right.
But as soon as they get a lender involved, the lender wants to make sure that it's worth it.
And of course, even people who are paying cash may want to have an appraisal.
And I do those quite often.
Right.
You're right.
Do your criteria change very much?
No, not at all. And I think, actually, I know that's kind of a side note. That's a really good question to answer. It doesn't matter if the appraisal is being done for a cash deal, for a bank, for as a refinance, estate purposes, divorce. I do them all, and the value is the value regardless of the scope of work or the reason for that the appraisal was ordered.
Done. Okay.
I also want to tell people, expect the appraiser to take interior pictures. We are now required to take interior pictures on every property we appraise. And so just understand that that's going to happen. And also, once you settle on your home, you may be outside and you may see someone drive by and take a picture of your house real quick or be in your window. Probably an appraiser, because that's going to be a comparable for the next probably 6 months, up to a year. So just expect, if you see someone drive by, take a picture of the front of your house, you don't have to call the cops. It's probably just an appraiser using your house as a comparable.
And how long, actually, that brings the next question. How long does an appraisal actually typically last?
Well, I would say most lenders, I want to say 4 months. I think some six months. I'll have to look into the whole FHA, but roughly that amount of time. Yes.
Okay.
Now you can order up to a year. My understanding is a lender can order an appraisal update. So it's just asking you has the value decreased or increased since the date of inspection.
Yes.
And I think they might have up to a year to do that. I think.
And you touched on this, to what extent do market conditions influence the work that you do, as far as, whether it's a very busy market or whether it's a very quiet market, that's going to have an impact.
It does have an impact. It's basically, I have to determine if the market is increasing or decreasing or stable, but in an increasing or decreasing market, I have to make a necessary adjustment. They're called time adjustments. It's date of sale. It's another element of comparison. There are 3 one-unit housing trend questions taken into consideration to determine the overall current market conditions and how they influence the appraisal. And so basically, are property values increasing, stable, or decreasing, which is what I just mentioned? Is demand and supply in balance, or is there a shortage of homes or an oversupply of homes? And what is the marketing time? Is the marketing time under 3 months? Is it 3 to 6 months? Or is it over 6 months?
So this is
those are questions I have to answer for every property. Yes, days on market. That's the marketing time. You are correct.
Okay.
So it is very important. The lender, we have to determine, is it increasing, is it a decreasing, or is it stable?
Absolutely. Okay. Are there conditions when an appraiser would choose not to go inside the property?
So typically, the only reason an appraiser would not go into the property and they would be doing an exterior inspection is if the lender orders a drive-by appraisal. So basically, the lender says, okay, appraiser, you do not have to go inside the property. We just want you to drive by, visualize it from the street, take a picture of the front, and then go ahead and use tax record information. Sometimes you can call the seller, but it is lender driven. The appraiser does not decide whether or not they go in or not.
Okay.
The lender tells us. Not very often anymore at all. I rarely see a drive-by appraisal.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And what do you in particular do to safeguard the interests of your client?
Well, I make sure that I'm not influenced in any way by the lender, by the seller, by the buyer, or the real estate agent. This allows me to remain unbiased in the process. We also have an ethical obligation to keep our files secure and not disclose the appraised value to anyone outside of our client. So, yes.
So another question from Kathy. How do appraisers use the tax assessment? Are some counties off by too much to consider tax value?
Used to be the general rule of thumb is that you could look at the tax assessment and sometimes you just knew in certain counties a tax assessment might have been 5% less than the market value. Ever since the crazy market in the 2000s, tax assessments I still feel are still not correct. So we look at them, but we don't use them for anything. They're just there. Okay, we know what the tax assessment is, but it doesn't translate to actual value.
And how can a homeowner actually prepare for the appraisal? Is there anything they can do?
So I typically tell a homeowner, don't clean for me. We're not looking at your personal items. We're not looking at how you live. Even when I'm doing a purchase, if you think about it, at that point, they've sold their home. And I come in and sometimes there's floor to ceiling boxes. So what we're really doing is we're looking at structural items. We're looking at quality of construction, condition, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms. But what they can do is provide us with a list of improvements, things that they've done since they've owned the property that they would want us to know about. Specifically, if they've done something in the kitchen or the bathrooms, we would want to know. With up to 15 years, that's kind of the threshold. Hasn't been updated, remodeled, what time. We don't need to have the cost. We don't need to know how much they paid for it, but it is nice to have the list of improvements. The other thing is if they have a floor plan, if they have a plat or a survey that shows the house on the lot that can be provided, all those things are very helpful and valuable tools.
Interesting. All right. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think it was a really comprehensive list of questions, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Angie.
Abby Rutledge from Nova Appraisers here in Northern Virginia.
Yes.
And it's been a pleasure, and thank you.
Thank
again
you
for
so
joining us
much
today.
for having me.
Absolutely great.